And happy Friday, everyone. I'm Thomas Gazer. I'm joined with Ken Zeska and Ken Borowski. And we're going to have a good chat tonight. And let's see who we have in the house. Getting feedback from someone. I've got Dan Linfors. See George Sinos is here. Hello. Robert Thomas. Chris Robin. The Grain Express is here joining us. Cold 455. Hello, John. Mr. Whithouse. Caboose 121. Cameron's here. Dan's Model Railroad Journey. Wiggy Wag. Stephen is here. Tom Tennyson. Thanks for joining us. Fire Guy 1000. And I'll say hello to Ken Borowski. How are you doing, Ken B?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be here tonight.
Glad to be here. We're have a good discussion. We'll go over some current events, and then we'll get into our discussion. Mr. Zeska, how are you tonight? He's on mute. So
there we go. Nope.
See if I can unmute him. He's got to click the unmute button. This is technical difficulties are usual for us here. Jeff, hello, Jeff. From the Mid-East region, Chesapeake Division, welcome. Jeff Birch is here. Tim D, good evening. Anybody else joining us, please say hello so we know who you're here. We see we got a couple people on Facebook. And say hi and give us some likes. And see if I can get Ken hit the unmute button.
There we go. I think I'm okay.
Yay, all right.
Too much technology for the old guy here.
Yeah. So how are you tonight?
You know, if I were any better, I'd have to be two people.
Two people, yeah. Yeah. And new, okay, so I see James, what we got here? James Ramus is here. Douglas Ziegler, all the way from Virginia. Wonderful Mid-East region. And I know a lot of people are up at Springfield, Massachusetts, a really big train show. I'd like to get there someday. I think three of us should head out there.
It's a pretty nice show. I've been there a few times.
Have you been there? What's it like? Tell us about it, Ken.
Have you ever been to Train Fest?
Yeah.
It's like 5 buildings like that, or 4 buildings like the size of Train Fest. So it's huge. It's probably the biggest one in the country for space-wise, I would imagine. But
okay.
One thing that I really enjoyed about it was being from the Midwest here, going out there is, you know how they usually have all the layouts set up and stuff, and you know you have all your vendors and that. Well, it was neat to see all the layouts, and they're all modeling like Conrail or Reading or New York Central or Pennsylvania. You know, there wasn't a BNSF engine in the whole state. I don't think it's like just total opposite of what you're used to seeing at shows in our part of the country here. It was kind of nice to see full layouts and stuff on railroads that you just don't ever see, at least around here. So that was one thing I really enjoyed.
So not the usual all Great Northern Fair. Is that kind of?
Yeah, there wasn't any Union Pacific or BNSF or none of that. It was all, you know, all the old East Coast stuff. It was kind of neat to see all that stuff running. So I enjoyed that part of it.
It's fun to go to a different area and see, you know, their impact and what's important to them. So I would, East Coast would be, you know, New York Central, Penn Central, like you said, Reading, everything would be very cool.
Yeah,
and that's it's on my list. And I think everyone should attend that or try to get to it. Here, Douglas says everyone do at least once. It'd be nice if it wasn't full of snow. I guess they don't have much snow this weekend, but it's kind of cold. And we've been
can't be any colder than here.
Yeah, better than here. We're gonna have a lot of things there. Roger Coleman says hello. Douglas Ziegler. And Jeff Sane is here from Minneapolis. Good evening, everyone. We're going to ask you all to participate in chat coming up with our discussion. So let's go into what's coming up here. Ken will discuss the events. Ken and Ken.
Okay.
So this is what's coming up. And if any of you have an event you want to be featured on here, I've had a couple of people contact me. Let us know. We'll put it on here free of charge, what's coming up. And I'll let you talk about our annual convention.
Start with the convention. That's a great idea. The TLR annual convention is May 19th to the 21st. It's going to be in Bloomington, right across from the Mall of America. And there's a lot of great things about this convention coming up. One of them is the hotel, like I said, is right across the Mall of America. They've got a special rate. It's the same rate that they had in 10 years ago. So it's a terrific rate. There's lots of food real close you can walk to if you don't like the hotel. But Greg and Mike have put together a phenomenal schedule of clinics. There's going to be great exhibits in the exhibit hall. Kennedy Gazier has got the Thousand Lakes Region Celebration Room ready to go. You know, there's going to be T-Track there and Fremo there and models there and clinics. There's going to be tremendous model layouts to go visit, and there's actually going to be some operation opportunities. So $35 for an NMRA member, $45 for non-members. That is an amazing value for 3 full days of activities. So, you know, I would say if you're in the 5-state area, you really need to plan on coming over and joining us. So plan on that.
Yep. And I think, so hotel, here's the rates, which is pretty good. You can come crash down there. If you can, I'm sure Ken Zeska will put you up at his house. I heard he said he'd do that. So
actually, I'm planning on staying there because that way I can stay up late and get my room set up as a hospitality suite. And
there we go. Lots of Ensign Morgan.
Ensign Morgan.
Ensign Morgan all around for everybody. Yep. Okay. But yeah, so if you're not in the NMRA, they do offer a 9-month rail pass, $20. You can't go wrong. And if you email registration form Greg Smith 1013, you'll get a form and you can sign up for all you want. They have a lot of wonderful activities, and so that's a big one coming up.
It sure is. You know, just one more thing about that 1995 rail pass. In the Twin Cities division, there's so many things to do that once that 1995 will open your eyes and get you into doing. You'll see what it's a terrific value in terms of what you get to do. It's just so much fun. And of course, then you've got the partnership program that you can actually save money on. NMRA membership is really a value if you decide you want to get involved and make it a value.
Yeah. And I know just in our area, NMRA members get a discount on admission to the modelers retreat, to the operators retreat, and to many other things. So
right,
you could earn your dues back very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
In the NMRA. And then also we got the annual convention going on, which will be in Texas, August 20th to 26th, Dallas, Fort Worth. And you can check the website to sign up for that and book a hotel at this wonderful palace they're having it at.
It is. And I'm not, I don't go to every convention. Probably I try to make at least one every 5 years, but I've looked at what's going on with this convention. It's going to be absolutely outstanding. So if you've got the time, if you can make the time to get down there, this will be a real treat for you.
That's right. And I do know that August in Texas is really cool. You'll know no heat. It'll be nice. So
yep, no snow.
No snow. There'll be no snow to bother that. So all right. So this is a new person. We got the New Berlin Model Train Swap Meet, and it's going on at Racine Avenue, New Berlin, Wisconsin. And that's April 23rd. So you'll be hearing from them on a few live feeds coming up. And so there'll be a lot of vendors there, and we'll get more information as this goes forward. So more in our area if you like making a road trip. A lot of the shows coming up are in Wisconsin. North Metro, flea market and open house Saturday, March 4th, 9 to 2, Coon Rapids, Minnesota, $5. And that gets you in to go see their amazing club.
Yes.
And if you're in the NMRA, the TCD, we are setting up operations on that layout. We are invited. They're a 100% NMRA club. Is that correct, Ken?
Yes, sure it is. It sure is.
Yeah, that was a fun event the last time that they did that. I'm looking forward to the next time they want to do a op session like that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. What did you do, Mr. Borowski? You were there. What job did you get?
I ran some road trains because I wanted to see what the layout looked like because I hadn't seen the layout before. So I wanted to get a kind of a tour, I guess, to call it that way. So it was fun. A lot of great guys there too, helping you out with everything, and especially being new for that layout, not knowing kind of where things are at. They were very helpful, and I'd really like to do it again whenever they do that again.
Yeah, I think that's worth the admission alone, getting to operate that layout. Ken Zeska, was it quarterly we're trying to set it up, or?
We're asking them to do it quarterly. It may be difficult to do it in the middle of the summer, but quarterly would be fun. And again, 100% NMRA club. So as NMRA members to be able to come in and operate that, boy, that's great value. I will admit I put a $10 bill in the tip jar for them because I just had so much fun.
Right. You never run out of trains. Huge. So their open house coming up in March. I think that's going to be a wonderful event. Also, now in February, coming up, the Mad City show, Madison, Wisconsin, 2-day show. They have a lot of layouts, vendors, historical societies. I've been to this one. It's well worth it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll be down there for that one in a couple of weeks.
Oh, will you? Are you going to be with the Fremo group then?
It's a Fremo group, but it's the ModuTrack group. It's like one step beyond Fremo. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they model basically southern Wisconsin, and everybody models a particular scene along either the Milwaukee Road or the Chicago Northwestern and N scale. So all the scenes are all custom-made buildings, and everything just matches the prototype. They've got all the photos of what they'd model on the fascia of the layout, and it's all scenic, it's all signaled, it's all unbelievable modelers. It's a really nice layout that they can bring to different shows and stuff. So I'll be down there with those guys.
There are some beautiful layouts there. The Wisconsin and Michigan we'll be talking about, and then some of the other clubs out of Milwaukee. And the one you mentioned is really nice. One of the nice N scale that blends with Fremo.
Yeah, the one thing about that layout that we're talking about is that everybody uses the same scenery, the same scenes all flow from one to another versus what you see in a lot of other modular layouts where everybody kind of does their own thing and you kind of get a little bit of a hodgepodge as you kind of go through the layout, where their layout is all one scene through the whole layout. And it's a large layout too. It's not a small little one. It's big. So it's a nice one to see if you're at the show.
They have a lot of room for those layouts, so you're not cramped either walking around.
Right.
So we may have to work on a road trip there, Ken. We'll trade off drivers, and
I think it's a good idea.
we can see how many quick trips and Culvers we can stop at. So
there you go.
There's all of them there. And then, of course, don't forget to stop at Scale Model Supplies. Wonderful place. They're getting all kinds of new equipment in, and hopefully we'll be able to spotlight some of that here. They've agreed to let us come down and take photos and a little video of the new arrivals. And so hopefully we'll be bringing that to our Friday night shows.
Yep.
And I think that's it. So we'll get into our little chat here. Do some technical stuff here, remove that. And what brought us up was, see if I can do this without wiping you guys up. So got this new RMC, one of my favorite magazines. And the cover story, you've seen this layout before. And he pulls off one of the better Tyler Whitcomb, why the better freelance railroads. And he talks about why to go freelance. And I thought this would be an interesting discussion with everyone here in the chat and myself. Ken being a wonderful prototype modeler. I'm kind of a freelance prototyper. Ken's a freelance prototyper. And I thought with the discussion we could have is the advantages and the disadvantages. So we want everyone in chat to pile in and talk about this. As well, tell us what you model. Let me get back to the beginning here. There we go. So prototype modeling versus freelance, and we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. Here we see a couple of wonderful layouts. The Blue Ridge division, Ken Browski, that's yours, correct?
Yep, that was in that magazine a couple of years ago.
N-Scale magazine, beautiful magazine. And then my freelance Split Rock Mining Company. And the advantages and disadvantages, and I think we both know about that. So tell us in chat what you prefer. And so let's go over the advantages of prototype modeling. Ken Borowski, I'll let you take this over. You can say what you want and then talk on some of these points, and other Ken and I will add in there. So.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of answers a lot of your questions if you're just getting into trying to model something. If you're, my opinion is if you're trying to make stuff up, it gets really hard to have it be prototypical because you kind of have to come up with all the answers. Whereas if you look at a prototype, it kind of solves all your problems. What color are your locomotives? What color are your freight cars? What color are your depots? Just basic stuff like that, kind of answers a lot of your questions for that. And then if you do model a prototype, you've got the historical societies, which I belong to the Clinchfield one. And I've gotten so much information through them, plus meeting former railroad workers that can answer all of your questions on stuff too. So that helps a lot. And then, towns and industries, well, if it's a prototype, you've got the chance to go visit the place, depending on what era that you're doing. If it's more of a modern era, you can take photos of stuff and you can measure things and get, paint samples or whatever you want to do. So that helps as well. So yeah, that's a big part of it, where a lot of your questions, track plans, if you're modeling a certain town, instead of just trying to wing it, or, you can actually look at like Google Earth nowadays, or you can go get track plan books from the original railroad that's got all the track charts and the grades and the curvature and stuff, if you're getting into it, that far into it. So yeah, it's a lot easier to, I think, answer a lot of your questions, prototypically. But then freelance is good too, because then you can just, go from there. Kind of like what you did. You went freelance, but you're basing it off of a prototype, so you're kind of following kind of a game plan, but you're doing your own paint job, your own railroad name. So I think it's the best of both worlds, but each has its own thing going for it.
Yeah. So Ken Zeska, how has the prototype influenced your layout?
Well, it influences my equipment and my modeling on the individual pieces of rolling stock and engines. It influences the commodities I want to move and how I want to move them, who I interchange with. But because I don't have space, I can't do the prototype things. And that was one of the points I wanted to ask Ken. Do you think that because you had so much space, it was easier for you to incorporate the specific prototypes, the towns, and how things laid out?
Well, what's nice, well, like in my case, I model N-scale, so that gives me a little bit more room in my available space to stretch things out, which is nice because you don't have scenes right on top of scenes. You can actually have a little bit of running room from one modeled section to another, where you're actually going through some, like in my case, forested area and stuff. So it kind of breaks things up a little bit. I think it makes the layout seem bigger than it is because you don't need to model as much stuff. but and it makes it seem like the train's actually, getting somewhere instead of, with the front of the trains in one scene and the middle of the trains in another scene and the back is in another scene. Mine are pretty much spaced apart a little bit. I mean, they're still closer than I would like them, but I still get to stretch them out a little bit being an N scale.
I do like the answers. And also, so I talk on the first 2 points, it focuses your modeling and it focuses your purchases, right?
Yeah.
So when you go to a train show, even if it's Springfield, you're looking for N scale, Clinchfield, family line CSX stuff,
Well, I think a big part of it too is you got to narrow down a year or a time frame, within a couple of years maybe, but it's when you got that, modeling the 50s through the 70s thing. Well, then you start buying all this stuff, which is great, but if you're trying to model a prototype, obviously you have to whittle it down to something within a couple year period, which then kind of answers another question for you, because like in my case, I modeled the mid 70s. Well, in the mid 70s, there was so much going on with the Clinchfield because that was when the family line started to take shape. So now you've got all the family lines railroads that are kind of getting mixed in. So you could go crazy with paint jobs and stuff. They had 30 different paint jobs in that time frame because everything was kind of getting merged and they were running each other's locomotives and starting to get more into, swapping power and stuff. So you kind of have to, pick a time frame and kind of go with that. Otherwise, like you said, when you go to a train show, you start buying everything that looks shiny and new. And then next thing you know, you got all these things sitting on your shelf that you don't end up using, especially if you're trying to model a certain era or a time frame.
Right. And like you pointed out, the historical information is there for you. You just got to find the right rabbit hole and figure out the color of the fire hydrants in 1958 in Ackley, Iowa. But
well, like one thing too, like you got manufacturers on there. If you're modeling a prototype, some manufacturers could be making stuff for you, which is good.
yeah,
Otherwise, you got to do all sorts of custom paint work and custom decal work, which isn't a big deal, but it's just one more thing you have to put on your to-do list. So,
right. And I think, like you said earlier too, if you're modeling modern, you can go out and see it. And Dan Dosa, that's been an amazing thing. Him and we go rail fan his layout, and I'm quite jealous of that. That we can go rail fan, where Mr. Lindfors works. We can go work the Hiawatha line with Sue the Milwaukee Road William models. We can go rail fan the Hennepin line to this day and see the industries that are on his layout. So it does have a lot of answers to that. You may be boxed in, we'll talk about the disadvantages, but I think too, like I said, your story's already in place. And we're, hearing in chat a bunch of other ones where people are like, a lot of prototype modelers are, here's Dan, the Ori brand, often ignored corner, but he's modeling, he's got a 7-year window on a little branch. And a few other people were talking about modeling. I'll scroll back up here. If it lets me.
See, there's another way to look at it too, is like, you could model, let's say, a prototype, but if you put it in the wrong part of the country, it's not going to seem right. Like in my case, if I model the Clinchfield, I want to model the Clinchfield, which is an East Coast coal hauling railroad in the mountains. Well, if I wanted to model the desert of California, but I wanted to run the Clinchfield, it just wouldn't seem right, because anybody that knows anything about railroads is going to have that in the back of their mind,
right?
And they're going to see it, even though the scenery might be great, beautiful cactuses and everything out that way. Because I do a lot of rail fanning out there. It's beautiful out there watching all the BNSF trains go through Cajon Pass and all that stuff. But if I was running Clinchfield on an area like that, it just wouldn't seem right. Even if I modeled everything right to the latest, the finest detail on the locomotives and stuff, if it's not in the right setting, it's not going to look right either. So you have to be careful. Like if you take a prototype and you put it in a part of the country that just doesn't really match the prototypical area of the railroad you're doing, that's another thing you got to be careful of.
Right. Your story's in place. but you have to sell it. You know, I think
Right.
you're probably the only guy in the Twin Cities area who has more trees than me, and I'm still adding them. But that's just what we model,
yeah.
you know. So there's not really many urban scenes on the Clinchfield or on the Split Rock. So
No.
yeah, there are some. These are some of the advantages. So some of the disadvantages, and I see people like Freelance, is that you can't have every engine or type. You know, the Clinchfield didn't have FP45s, even though you like them, you know.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too. Like you said, if you're going to model a prototype, you're kind of boxed into a time frame, and it pretty much answers your questions of what kind of engines and paint colors and things. That, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but if you're going to try and do it as a prototypical model, you kind of have to follow the guidelines of the prototype. So,
right. And like I said, some information may not be available. Like Ken, aren't you digging into the NP yards in the cities, the A line and the F yard and stuff, and it's a constant dig?
It is, and through the Historical Association, right now I'm scanning volumes and volumes of builders' photos, and that's fun. But now for my era, which is the mid to late 60s, I have to then count on finding pictures off the internet of cars in that era, because particularly as I try to do more weathering in the 60s, the mid 60s, the late 60s is different than it would have been in the 50s and different than it would have been in the 90s. And so going back to the point that Ken made, you know, you pick an area, you pick a time frame, and it certainly helps you get your prototype look that you want. So
now, Ken, I have a question for you. I'm not all that familiar with your layout. What railroad and time frame or whatever are you doing on yours?
Well, I model. I've got a urban area that's got an industrial park and a downtown, which is the Twin Cities, and then I have a branch line that goes out to central Minnesota, and all this is mid 60s, and then I have a loop around the outside of the layout that also services some industries. And the reason I have that loop is because there aren't a lot of S-scalers in the area, and I like to have a spot where they can come and put things on the layout and put some mileage on them. So I am trying to stick with what would be typical on the mid 60s. So that's why I'm interested in what the industry still look like, what the when you look at an urban industrial area or an urban downtown like the downtown Minneapolis, the ground looks very specific. It's dirt. It's dirty dirt, and in many cases it's still oil spilled, and so I don't need a lot of trees there. But you're getting away from having the soot covered box cars because there's not steam, but you still have enough urban pollution, and the early diesel still kicked out enough carbon that you get some weathering that way. But there's not the graffiti that you might expect. So the weathering can also help show what time we're looking at. But no, I don't have any big boys. And although S-Scale has a real nice GG1, I just haven't figured out how to make a GG1 go to central Minnesota hauling boxcars full of grain.
Going out west to the Milwaukee Road. So.
Right. So
all right, and there's a lot of comments in there about like William says here, fuel really sells the fuel. I'm not saying we need tall elevators. So being a prototype modeler, William is actually getting his grain elevators at a prototype height.
Right.
And for those of us that are used to the Walters grain elevators, if you watch through the Milwaukee Road channel, it looks crazy tall.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel the same way about trees, because I model 60 and 80 and 90 foot pine trees, and everybody says, well, your trees are too big. Well, everybody's used to little woodland scenic trees, and I'm like, head to the northern woods. I mean, my neighbor has an 80-foot tree in his yard, so I'm like,
Yeah.
But someone's saying Zeska's he's got big boys there. We'll have to check that out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I double head the big boy with the GG1.
That would be good. So we'll go on to advantages of freelance. And of course, number one is rule one. We like to call these rule one modelers, and you run what you like. And I think that's more of a freelance where you see someone who operates, but they have engines from different railroads, maybe like a Greg Dahl. You have SP engines, you have Rock Island, you have Milwaukee Road engines, but it's still it's prototypical operations. And the other advantage, the creative history, the alternative history is kind of interesting. We'll talk about that later. Some people who like a prototype, maybe they like the Clinchfield, but they want to model the Clinchfield, into the 1990s, maybe the Clinchfield with SD70s or something.
Yeah, I've seen a couple people make some like fantasy type paint jobs like that, like you said about the Clinchfield in the more modern era now with like engines you'd see out running now, but painted up as Clinchfield. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's the fun part about doing a freelance thing too. Like you said, it's your railroad. Whatever you enjoy doing is the fun part about the hobby. Yeah, it all depends on what your end goal is, I guess.
Yeah, and I think unique models and paint schemes. John puts here, his tastes are too eclectic. That might be mine. Freelance. He likes all those Alcos, and you see Tom loves rule one, and that's fine. Nobody has any problem with that. I think some people who do that have felt that everybody looks on them in a different way, but I don't think so. If you're enjoying it, if you're having a good time, I just want to see a smile on your face.
Yep.
And things like that. And I think it's so the creative history and then unique models and paints, you can blend areas and railroads together. You can kind of say, well, I liked SP and I like this, but I want to do both. So maybe the SP and the Western Pacific had a branch line, and you can blend them with a little bit of a history bender instead of a geography bender. So
right.
And things like that.
Well, that is a good thing about for those of us that have basements. Once you get below the sill plate, the space-time continuum gets warped all over the place. And so what happens in the basement may not accurately portray what happens in real life. So
it's pretty hard to model a prototype in a basement just in general, because you only have so much room and you're going to hit a wall at some point, and you're going to have curves on railroads that probably didn't have curves. And so there's always compromise no matter what you're doing. Yeah.
I think every layout's a compromise. Dan Dosa and I talk about that. That's right, Ken. You hit that 100%. And so even if it is fictitious, a split rock or something, it's still a compromise on the side. I can't run 120 car ore trains. So
right.
There's always like this. And so the disadvantages, and the number one is like my thing is the unbelievable story. And I remember Joe Fugate, the publisher of Model Railroad Hobbyist, talked about freelancing. If it takes you more than a minute to tell your story, no one's going to buy it. I think when you get into the eccentric billionaire buying this and this and this, then it gets out of hand.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you put kind of weird things on your layout, if you've got to explain stuff to everybody that comes over, maybe that's not right. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's your railroad, so you can do what you want, but all depends what your goal is.
You can, but I think if you're trying to get it across, such as I am, and such as Ken as and other people, you have to find that story that's believable. You know,
Right.
Why is it here?
Right.
And then shiny objects, buy anything that catches the eye. Kind of stick to one thing. This gentleman does have quite the variety of motive power, and I always thought that short lines to make up, these guys have freelance short lines would have some mercy on their mechanical forces and say, we're going to repair GEs, or we're going to repair EMDs, or, we're not going to have parts for 10 different engines. Ken, in the airline industry, you're not going to fly planes, hopefully, for 30 different manufacturers, if there was that many. But
no, well, like you brought that up, because actually, one thing that, I'm going to talk about the clinch shield because I know about it, but in the early 70s, they bought some GE U-36Cs because at the time they needed power and that was all that was available, so they had to buy them. But everything else they had on the roster was all EMDs. So as soon as they had the chance, they did they had 7 of those locomotives. So they did a swap with the Seaboard Coastline for SD-45s. So they could get back to an all EMD fleet, like you said, for standardizing parts and maintenance and stuff. So that's all stuff that when you're modeling a prototype, it all fits into kind of what you're modeling. Or if you're doing a freelance, you have to think about that. Do I want every different type of locomotive that they made, or do I want to have like a fleet of SD-40s or whatever, GP-38s? So it's like for maintenance wise, that would be what a prototype would do, try to standardize things. And they'd buy them in a big batch of orders too. You wouldn't just buy one, you'd buy 10, 20 or whatever at a time. So you'd always have a bunch of the same type of locomotive running around. So
right,
just things to think about.
And I know somebody in chat mentioned repainting, like patching engines, your short lines, a little short of money buying a secondhand. And I think back to the Wisconsin Central days, and even they went out and bought SD-45s.
Yeah.
Because they could get parts and the guys could fix them. And they're buying them from the BN and the Santa Fe, anybody else who had one running. And it kind of made the railroad what it was. And I think that helps sell the story. Yeah. And also, like I said, the track plan, Ken Borowski, you brought that up earlier about if you want to know what Town A looked like, here's the track plan. Dan Linfors mentioned it. This is what Array looked like. Here's the track plan.
Right.
William Sampson, here's the track plan of the Hiawatha district. Dave Hamilton's in chat. Here's what Dubuque looked like. Here's what Winona.
Well, I've seen too a lot of guys that are just like making up a town on their layout. They'll just put down a bunch of track to what kind of looks nice to them, but then when they start to operate it, it's not working right. So even if you're not even modeling a certain prototype, it might not be good to look at a place and just steal the track plan off of a prototype and use it on yours, because obviously the railroad built it to make it work. So if you do operations, not everybody does operations, so I guess it doesn't always matter, but at least dropping off cars and with runarounds and stuff that it will work in that spot because the track's laid out for that reason, instead of just making a switching puzzle per se or whatever. But I mean, people like to do that as well. So that's all, like you said, stuff to think about. But right. Track plan books are definitely a big help. Yes. Google Earth, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I see too many freelancers that I'm going to model a town. So here's the scrapyard, the grain elevator, the oil dealer, and the box factory. And the next town is the scrapyard, the oil dealer, the box. And it's like, look at what railroads went from town to town, from the city to the country, in the area you want to model.
Right.
Maybe they moved a lot of limestone or calcium. Maybe they moved a lot of wood products.
Yep.
So yeah, the track plan can get out of control. Doug made an interesting comment here. Got in the hobby. I bought what I liked. 25 years later, I adopted the prototype concept and had to sell many items to focus my attention and goals on the prototype.
Right.
Now that you can also sell those items to buy the correct prototype. Mike Jordan talks about this all the time when he had reefers, but then he got told, he had meat reefers and Swift when he needed Pacific Fruit Express. So you can evolve to a somewhat prototype freelance over time.
Well, it's kind of amazing too when you start looking at how actually shipments went different places. I mean, there's a lot of programs out there for like routing rail cars and stuff, but if you look at the prototype, a lot of the cars just run back and forth. I mean, from one industry to the other one, because they were just hauling the same product back and forth.
Right.
I mean, there's a bunch of them on my layout that just went from industry A to industry B, and that's all they did. The same cars went back and forth. So, it's not just like a crapshoot, whatever you're going to get next op session. It's like, these cars, this is where they go.
And I think that's digging into the prototype as well. Yeah. So
even like nowadays, you see certain cars got a certain, thing painted on the side of an auto rack or something. Well, a couple of weeks later, you might be seeing the same auto rack go by because it's just in the cycle. It just goes back and forth. You see the same type of graffiti on the side, so it's the same car going back and forth.
And Chris brings up your point too again, Ken Borowski, about when. And I know Dan Linfors mentioned this, and everybody else mentioned their eras. Once you understood the concept of when, that simplifies a lot of things too, even on a freelance layout. That for me, I know 1969, so I don't have any automobiles from 1970. I don't have any, companies from past that. For my structures, I don't have a Blockbuster Video. So, picking that era is important.
Yeah.
Yep. So Tom, this shows the creativity of model railroaders. If you want to make it easy on your mechanics, so they don't have to maintain a bunch of old Alcos, model railroaders just have to download EMD sound files.
Yeah,
and that solves the problem. So,
well, that's actually prototypical. How many Alcos were remotored?
Yeah.
Rapido's coming out with these beautiful PA units, and the Santa Fe had 3 of them that they threw EMD engines in, so they're going to have a different sound. I think that's great, George. That if somebody on their layout could notice it, would be really cool.
It is, yeah.
Cool. And then William wanted this, Ken Borowski. What the book he has that got lists movement? What was that book?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that at the Modelers Retreat. That's part of my presentation for that deal. But it was a book.
Good. Don't tell them then. Make them come. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we're not going to tell you until after the Modelers meet. So if you want to know first, come to the Modelers meet.
We'll do a live stream from the Modelers meet.
But it's been really good for helping me set up car routings and stuff, because you're actually using prototypical movements of the cars. So
it's great when you find that treasure, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the only one I've ever seen, and it's been really nice to have. So
yeah, that's great.
So prototype modeling, and we all know Jack Burgess, beautiful. Yosemite Valley is probably the alpha and omega of prototype modeling, a specific day and a specific hour on this Yosemite Valley. I don't think anyone I've ever seen take prototype more than he has. But still, there's variety in there. Cars come on and off his layout. The Southern Pacific, Santa Fe, interchange.
Yeah.
The engines, caboose, passenger stays the same. But even with that, you can still have some variety in there.
Well, that's a big part of any layout, is like your interchanges and your bridge traffic and stuff, because that just brings all sorts of other things onto your modeled layout. So You kind of need to have, well, you don't need to, but it definitely opens up a lot of new avenues if you have something like that you can put into your layout.
Right. And then, of course, Tony Custer building his wonderful nickel plate. I think it's the 3rd subdivision. I know Joe Binish says he's operated on it. But even then, you're making compromises because you can't fit 125 miles in a basement. But, you know, and you have different things like that. And then, of course, Dave here, the Onondaga Cutoff, does Livestream, models prototype. He's got prototype Conrail, the exact train numbers, most of the exact consists. But it's freelanced in that he models a cutoff that would have been around, I believe, the city of Syracuse. And so you can still have this beautiful, if you like Conrail, your double track main line, your TV trains, your Boston trains, but put it into a setting you want. So I would call that prototype freelanced.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You know. And here Brett says proto-lanced. Okay. I like that too. I think, like you said, back to the era and do things like that.
So, Tom, one of the things that I'm noticing here in the chat is that we've got folks that have so many terrific ideas. I'm really hoping that on the Facebook page, they give us some links so that they'll share what their ideas are and what they're doing, because I find that inspirational, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that. You know, even like Jared says, well, he hasn't got the layout yet, but he's got in mind what he wants to do. Well, share what he wants to do. And again, if you come into the prototype modelers meet, bring your documentation log, bring your ideas, bring your sketches, and sit down at a table and share them with us and tell us what you're doing.
Right.
Well,
and bring your Masabi pulp cars, even if they're not painted a decal, bring them because they're unique.
Yep.
Well, if nobody has seen Williams Sue the Milwaukee Road YouTube channel, that's just a wealth of information. He does, I mean, even though he models the Milwaukee Road, like you said, along the grain elevators there, he just has so many other things on there, from how he's wired it, you know, good wiring plans to just, you know, how he laid it out prototypic. You know, there's just so much more to this hobby, which is why this hobby's such a great hobby. You've got, you know, electrical type stuff you have to mess with. You've got scenery stuff, you've got research, you've got carpentry stuff. So there's just so much stuff that's involved with this hobby.
Yes.
And he just covers a lot of that. So that's been very entertaining watching some of his stuff. If you haven't seen it, he gets into a lot of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of resources out there. The Modelers Retreat is a great place. Like I said, I saw Wiggy Waggy says he's just building models and things. If any of you have them half finished or in your ideas and got a picture of the prototype and what you're making, bring them. Those are the discussion models.
Yep.
That's what people want to see, how you're doing that. And then they want to know why. And then you can tell them what the Wales branch is, probably the least known portion of the famous Duluth, Mesabi, and Iron Range ever. So then some of the freelance, here we have, I think it's Gary Peterson as a Salt Lake Southern, which he totally scratch built or freelance from scratch, but he designed decals and a roster and a color scheme that would fit. You know, everything's not a different color. Every engine's not a different road name or, you know, or paint scheme or patch out. So, and it's kind of modern, and I like that it's blue with a white stripe and some. It's cheap. You know.
Well, that's a thing.
Yeah.
That's a thing too. Like in the, you know, depending on your era, the mid 70s, a lot of railroads changed their paint jobs into this just basic one color thing with just a name on the side of the engines, you know, instead of like in the 50s and the 60s when they were just getting their diesels and stuff, they had all these fancy paint jobs on the engines and that. And then, you know, 70s rolled around, everything is painted blue, black, red, and just stuck a name on the side, and that's all it was.
Yeah.
So that
the dip job, paint don't pull.
Yep.
So that's what one guy told me. I said, "Why do you have this?" They go, "Paint don't pull." And
yeah.
So this is, like you said, this is good for the 70s. Very simple. A dip job, some people have called it, minimal safety striping. and you're not really advertising for passenger trains or anything. So I find that very plausible. And here we see the Wisconsin and Michigan, and they have a wonderful show layout, home layouts, and they built a what if railroad based on actual plans that never came through. But their paint scheme is plausible. I mean, every ore hauling railroad is yellow and maroon.
Yeah.
So, and they got the simple safety stripes, and you can tell it's pre-70s because they got a bigger logo and more fancy stuff on there, but it's believable. It's not gaudy.
Yeah. When did the ditch lights come into play on locomotives? What year was that? You know,
Probably 2000, 95, 2000. Okay. And that's another telltale thing too about the graffiti era. We always think this graffiti's been around, but
no,
that's post 95 too.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you go look at railfan videos on YouTube, like Santa Fe trains or some on the main line, you're not going to see them covered. You
exactly.
know? So that's an era thing too. What do we got here? So, good point. Theater of the mind. Somebody who's led it's a story. The Brits are famous for the story on the model. And I agree, because the Brits have to compact it. You know, they don't have the full rooms like Ken and I. If someone gave you 2 feet by 5 feet to tell the story of the Mesabi Wales branch, could you? Or the Clinchfield, could you? You know.
Yeah.
990s, 92 maybe. There were some before that. And then, of course, a freelance prototype. Eric Bruman, the artist, made this layout look so believable.
Well, see, that's a whole nother aspect too. Because if I'm thinking right, he kind of keeps his current. So he's constantly, you know, when things are changing, he's changing. So his is like an up-to-date railroad. So that's a whole nother avenue to go too.
Right.
So you just keep buying and selling. So that kind of keeps you buying, but then you got to sell the stuff. So
yeah. And he does a great job of freelance. You know, an idea I try to steal from him is make your engines have a family appearance. You know, they've all got the stripes. They've all got the same paint type. They've all got the Southern Pacific light package. They've all got, you know, air conditioners. And there's a similarity. And I tried to do that with the split rock. We're all going to have the same bells, the same this, the same filters.
Yeah.
And it helps sell that story. You know, I think I know my story. I joke about the split rock. I know people believe it because I've had 3 people apply for jobs so far. And I've had 5 people tell me that they were just rail fanning it up in northern Minnesota. So, and it's, yeah, to the Allagash. Yeah, my Confluence Allagash is another one. But I think these prototype and freelance, if done well, you can get away with it. So we'll talk with chat now and see what they model and why, and what they think of prototype modelers and other things like that. And we'll see Mr. Linfors have one engine on commercial that doesn't even have ditch lights. Okay. I'll have to check out which one that is. Ken, did you see any other comments in there, Mr. Zeska?
You know, there were so many. Daniel Banks had a series of comments that were really great. One of them was up here about storytelling and trains are moving theater, and that reminds me of something that that famous, world famous modeler William Sampson says that it's like art, but it's not just 3-dimensional. It's got motion to it. And I thought that was pretty cool. So
and then Daniel also brings this up. Hey, model something you don't get to see anymore. your model, you get the model history.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, and I on the other hand model something that I saw. Maybe kind of for the same reason I like to listen to the Beatles and the Moody Blues, and just because I like to get back into some things like that. But going to anybody's layout, and we talk about selling the story. I think that's part of the fun and part of the challenge for any of us that are going to go visit a model railroad is we have to be open to getting into the story ourselves if we're really going to enjoy it. So,
well, everybody's got their own interest too. Some people like the scenery aspect of it. They're not really worried about what types of engines they run or whatever. They like doing scenery. Other people are more into operations. Other people, everybody has their own interests. I kind of like doing the research and kind of seeing where cars are going and shipments and old industries and going rail fanning and finding old pieces of rail that go up into the woods somewhere and find an old foundation back in the woods. And hey, what was this building way back when or whatever that, everybody's got their own interest in stuff. So it's hard to just come up with one answer for, any of these topics. It's just kind of what you enjoy doing.
Sure. So I operated at Ken Borowski's last Tuesday, and he actually imported a guy from East Tennessee to come and talk to us while we were modeling it. It just, the ambiance was incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, that's something too. When you're in different parts of the country, people are, talking with subtitles, you kind of gotta have a guy typing it out for you so you know what he's saying.
There you go.
But yeah, it's fun, meeting people in different parts of the country and sharing what you're doing, and especially when they come visit you and then you go visit them and see what they're doing, and it's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah. Oh, I love this hobby. I love being transported to the Carolinas, to California, produce country, to Albany, New York, and the 20th Century Limited, to the alleys of Minneapolis. I love a well done story.
Yes.
And like this, so they're bringing up the Central Minnesota Western. Like you said, Ken Browski, you just mentioned you came across an old right-of-way. Well, what was it? And then you start digging, and there's the St. Cloud to Fergus Falls. Well, what if it was running today? What would it look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother avenue to go down. People can, get into that type of stuff and come up with their own railroad for it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just so many different ways you can go with this hobby, which is kind of the whole fun part about it.
It is. Yeah.
And Chris brings up a good point too. If you can't decide on a paint scheme, lettering, numbering, get the engines you like and patch them.
Right.
That's been around since, how long have they been patching engines, even in steam?
Yep.
Yeah,
I'll post to the Facebook the engines that I use on my Granger Railroad, the Minnesota Heartland, and you'll recognize right away that all I did was take a prototype paint scheme and take off the prototype name and put it in the color schemes right there. But it's very effective and it looks nice.
See, now there's ways you can go a little too far with that too, because let's say you buy a BNSF locomotive, like their current paint job, and you put some made up railroad on it. Every time somebody sees it, they're going to think BNSF, and it's going to be hard to sell your freelance one because you're using, so it kind of goes both ways with that as well too.
I imagine.
Careful.
Good point.
Because everybody's used to seeing it, and when you see it, that's kind of what you think. It's like, well, that isn't whatever you're modeling. That's BNSF. It's so it gets tough too.
Yeah.
So I guess that'd be one of the drawbacks to freelance.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah. And so, and like, here's another what if. So if the Masabi was still going, what would have they done? Would they've gone GE or EMD to get all that red dirt up and down the hill?
Yeah. We see that at the Northern Pacific Railroad Historical Association. People will bring in what ifs, and so you'll have something like that. A brand new techno toaster or whatever they call these new GEs done in the old Great Northern Freight scheme. So,
and like here, like Jeremy, there's a rabbit hole that's just waiting to be dug. And I think what's good about this, though, it's local.
yep.
So it's not like you're trying to find info on a short line in Oregon, through historical societies, through I think it's a Great Northern M&L line. The information's out there somewhere.
It is.
And to me, that's half the fun, if not more, of digging into, hey, I want to model just this section, the Hutch branch, the loose line.
Yeah.
And there's so much there. If anybody's ever ridden a bike out on that old Plymouth line and seen the industries and the warehouses and the spurs going off to who knows where, to have a Sanborn map would just be make a fabulous layout.
Absolutely. Yep. And Jeremy, to your point specifically, guys that model that are interested in the history of the MNNS, and there's a lot of people that have good information on that. So get through the NMRA, get involved, get a hold of me or at the modelers meet, look me up. I'll share what I have and share some names of other people that have that. But again, that goes back to the advantage of having a group like the Twin City Division. We can share a lot of information.
Yeah, we could probably find you someone or
absolutely
join you in your search, because that's kind of a bad habit of mine. Is I listen to other people's rabbit holes and I start digging with them.
Boy,
that's what I found.
So and Jeremy lives in Bloomkist, and Bloomkist is not the end of the world, but with a 9-iron you can reach the end of the world.
That's right.
I drove through Bloomkist on the way to Montevideo for years going to National Guard, so I know where he's living.
You know the off-ramp there, okay.
I know, yeah, right. The bump in the road. So get a hold of me, Jeremy. Oh, well.
So this is interesting. Gray Road Town marked it off because I would never be able to do all I wanted to do it justice. And I hear this quite a bit, that, well, I want to model St. Paul Union Depot, but I can't in my basement. And I'm like, where can you meet halfway in the freelance prototype that, you want to model this town? Is there a portion that really catches your eye? You can't model all of Minneapolis, but like William and Dan Dosen, well, we're going to model a Hiawatha. We're going to model a Hennepin line. Joe Binish, I'm going to model 2 of the alleys. And,
Yeah.
And then here talks about the Mesabi Road Historical Archives in Mr. Rengo. So the information's out there.
Right.
And somebody has it. I always believe that. With the internet, somebody has it. And we're hoping people, whenever they have information, put it out there. And this is why, like Ken Zeski, you said earlier, put it on Facebook. Put all this stuff that you have, please put it on the Twin Cities Division. Yep. Share it with others. Who knows what you're going to spark?
Yes.
I've always liked the Clinchfield. I think the only Clinchfield engine I ever saw was in Yard Center in Chicago. There was a SD45-2. I was rail fanning one time, and I must have taken 100 pictures of the same engine. But reading about it and now seeing it in Ken's basement is just wonderful.
Well, it depends where you live too, how hard it is to get some information. Like you said, if it's not on the internet, you might not have access to the historical society locally. I mean, here, Great Northern and Northern Pacific was just huge in this town. So there's lots of people that have pictures and information. Well, for me to get information on what I'm trying to model, I sent off letters back in the day before the internet to some people and got, handwritten notes back, and went down and visited people, and they introduced me to some other people. And then you start rummaging through their stuff and you find books in their basement and you find old paperwork, and you make photocopies of stuff. And then you realize that some of these people, donated stuff to some universities, and universities have got a whole like East Tennessee State University's got a whole has got a whole Clinchfield wing in their library with archives and stuff. So anytime I'm down there, I'll go to that university and just spend a day there going through a bunch of records and making photocopies of stuff. And so, one little phone call or one little letter to somebody can just open up a whole new world of finding information.
Absolutely.
Does Clinchfield have their own historical society, or is it all in the CSX?
No, they've got a couple separate ones. They've got one that's just a Clinchfield Historical Society, and then they've got one that's the North Carolina chapter, which is the one that I belong to, of the Clinchfield Historical Society. So they have a couple. And then they've got the archives at East Tennessee State University, which has got a wealth of information. And then, way back when in the mid 70s, there was a lot of articles in Model Railroader and, RMC about the Clinchfield that got me kind of hooked. And then, I wrote letters to some people and met some of these people and eventually went rail fanning with some of these people. And then you get introduced to other people and it's just kind of snowballs. But, that's kind of the fun part of the hobby for me is doing the legwork and doing the research and doing the rail fanning and looking for the old tracks that go to abandoned buildings and stuff and trying not to get shot and things like that. But
I think, like we said, a polite word and well done social skills will get you a lot of information.
Yes.
Yeah.
A thank you and things like that. And so, like Dan Linford is trying to find information in Colorado. I'm sure a week out in Denver or the Rocky Mountain, he could probably dig up some more information easier than he could at the MTM Museum and things like that.
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
But I agree. There's information. My personal story has been digging with not the iron ore modelers, but with the steel mill modelers in trying to figure out how and why they ordered iron ore a specific way. And after meeting this person and that person, I got introduced to two gentlemen at a flea market who actually work up in the taconite plants up on the range, who filled in the last little dot because I was building the information from the mills and the information from the mine. You can build a bridge from both ends, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just missing the center portion of and then they told me that all the mills wanted was iron ore at 65%. All the rocks that they get should be 65% because that's what the taconite pellets are. And I was like, okay, that's how I'm going to blend my cars with the pins.
Yeah.
Red dirt. Thanks, William. Thanks. But
well, it's kind of funny what you said earlier is that all those iron ore railroads have that maroon colored engines or colors on their paint jobs.
Yeah.
And all the coal hauling railroads are all painted black. And it's like, it kind of goes with what you're hauling because it's going to be all over the sides of the cars and the engines. So you might as well paint them that color. So,
yeah. Yeah. Well, you look at that was the Chesapeake and Ohio and Baltimore and Ohio were
dark blue.
Identical, the lettering. One said Chesapeake. That was almost the only difference. So I'm like,
well, look at like Norfolk Southern and stuff, black because, everybody that was hauling coal was painting everything black.
Yeah. Penn Central, Pennsylvania, Norfolk South, all of it was black.
I swear,
you had to have a little short line to be colorful,
coming out over the podcast I was doing. No problem.
Local Marshalltown to Mason City worked. See there, you always find the one guy.
Yeah.
Oh.
And they'll tell you, even like probably some of your locals.
Well,
why did it run out of here?
Well, I was talking to William Sampson about this at the last show we were at. And it's kind of interesting too, because everybody takes hundreds of photos of stuff. They'll take a picture of an engine or a locomotive or a car or something. And it might not be the best picture and they throw it in a drawer and they never look at it again. But the next guy down the road might think that's the best picture in the world because there's a building or something he's trying to build in the background that nobody's got a picture of. So all these pictures that people got to think they're no good because they're not centered on the picture or the light isn't great, but maybe the guy that's trying to figure out what color something was painted doesn't really care what the main picture is of the car. He's looking at what's in the background.
Right.
So it'd be neat to see a lot of the pictures that people never post because they don't think they're any good, just to see
Right.
what's on the rest of the picture.
Right. Your throwaway shots of the car.
Yeah.
I think the ones that I adore now are pictures of to see the vehicles.
Yes.
You know, here's 1965 in Keewatin, or 1965 up in Virginia, and I'm looking, okay, what cars were they all driving?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and what businesses? And in my era, I get to have businesses that are not allowed anymore. So, you know, like I have a furrier, you know, selling furs and storing furs, and you kind of think about that. Well, back then it was nothing. In the 60s,
Right.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of, you know, I love pictures like that of showing down a street.
Yep.
You know, here's a view of Waseca in 1968. And it's like, oh, it's a crappy photo. I'm like, no, look at that Fairlane. No, look at that Impala. Look at that.
Yep.
Can I get that colorized? So, yeah, you're right. The throwaway pictures are what we desire when you're trying to model that prototype. You know.
Yeah. Again, that kind of goes back to the idea about weathering. Whenever I see a picture from the 60s, if it has a good picture of a car, even though it may not specifically be a car that I model, I put it in a special folder that I can go through. And so that's pretty cool. I like that. But to your point earlier, that's part of why I'm scanning all these documents for the NP Association, so they can put them out on the internet so people can have access to them.
Yeah. That's why I think places like, was it Railroad Archives or Railroad Photos that do freight cars and try and get people to list where they were and the date is so wonderful. You know, it's just.
Yep.
So that utility truck, there you go. You know, and it's probably, back then it was NSP. It wasn't Excel. And you have, you know, little things like that tell your story.
Yeah.
That, hey, this was the rural cooperative in South Carolina.
Yeah.
You know, this is the rural cooperative in Western Minnesota. You'd have Ready Kilowatt out there, you know.
Yeah. Hey, do you see that note from Chris Bell? Chris, where has Andy Brown been posting these films?
Yeah, can you put a link or show us where?
Yeah, show us where that is. I'd love to see him. So
Montezuma. Yeah, you look at things like that, you know, you keep hoping, you know, anything pops up on the old Clinchfield and you're like, you know, Ken's probably seen all the trains, but I want to see that structure.
Yeah.
Well, especially when you're I mean, it's hard to believe that the 70s was 50 years ago already. So it's like you can't just go there and take a picture of something. That's because there's nothing left in a lot of these places.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes it tough too. But you know, one thing nice that, you know, people modeling nowadays are just starting out is you've got like just a wealth of information to pick from. Back in the day, it was a lot harder to get information too.
Yeah,
it's just, but they're out there, you know, you listen like Mike Jordan and you'll find like the Tony Thompson or somebody of reefers, and you'll find the Dean Freitag for steel mills, and you'll get this type of information and hone in your modelings, even if it's freelance.
Yep.
It's like, what would the Split Rock have for maintenance away equipment at that time?
Sure.
So I would look at the Mesabi or the Great Northern or Reserve or Erie. What did they have?
Well, I learned something watching your podcast on your layout, Tom, because you said you just have the big numbers on the side of your ore cars. You don't have all the reporting marks and all that other stuff that's kind of generally on a freight car. And you said because the cars never leave the railroad, so they didn't need all that on there, which is something I would have never known that. I mean,
yeah.
You know, so that was something I learned just watching your video on that.
Yeah. And I got, like I said, go up rail fanning, reserve mining, and Erie mining. And of course I took pictures of some of the cars. They're all the same, but I'm like, I better carry. And I'm looking, I'm like, Well, it's just a number.
Yeah.
Just so they know which one to repair.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's no other report. Don't know how many tons it carries or wheels or brakes. There's nothing on it but a number.
Yeah.
And a few, like you see in my yellow cars, a few would have lettering. I'm like, well, what's that? This was the first car from Silver Bay. This was,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's little things like that that I steal, bring into to sell my story even more. That I'm like, just put a number on there.
Yep.
Yeah, the Mondovi line, wonderful line in Wisconsin. And that's speaking of, Ken Browski brought this up earlier. All those years I lived in Eau Claire, I'd go down there and I go, that looks like an old right-of-way, the snowmobile trail. And they said, yeah, it was. So I'm like doing the research on this, and there's a couple really nice books on it. So
there's a website called Aerial Archives where you can pull up maps from, depending on how far back you want to go for different parts of the country. But, they got the spot on there where it's not the greatest picture, but if you're just looking for like a track plan and to see if a building was there and stuff, a lot of those older satellite photos are still pretty good to use. They're not, crystal clear like Google Earth or nothing, but if you're trying to find something from 50, 60 years ago, and that's another resource where you can go to that one and, type in the date and they'll give you a picture and you can kind of just keep scrolling around and see what's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, if you see those maps and you want to freelance, the CNW, you don't want to have CNW Jeeps and this, and your freelances, it still existed and they sold it to Watco or somebody or the so there you go. There you got your SW 1500 and a Jeep in any paint scheme you want.
Yeah.
Trundle along your 10-mile-an-hour line till it meets the Union Pacific somewhere. It's a beautiful way to do a freelance. Very believable. And you could bring up a map that, hey, this is a former CNW Great Northern Clinchfield line. They sold off to the Hazy Railroad. Wasn't that one off the Clinchfield?
Yeah, the Hazy, yep.
B unit.
Yeah, B unit with a little cab built into the end of it with a light on the end, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just what a crazy thing to model, but you could get away with it as a freelance.
Yeah, like if you just wanted to model the Hayside branch, all you needed was a B unit. B unit and a bunch of coal cars, and you're good to go.
A B unit and a Details West window.
Yep.
So yeah, commodities, car types, that'll help out your freelance too.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're modeling a secondhand freeline branch line, you're not going to have the real modern heavy cars.
No.
You might have the 70 tonners, even box cars hauling grain out.
Yeah.
And that I think helps tell the story of we have no money. we patched over a Union Pacific Jeep. We patched over, a Clinchfield Jeep or something and things like that. Oh, here we go. Somebody says here, Rail Guide. So it's an app.
That's neat. I've never heard of that.
I'll have to look that one up.
Yep.
But like Ken Browski, you said earlier about right-of-ways, and I haven't seen the right-of-way, but I found photos of the Split Rock Logging Company.
Okay.
There's a picture of an engine, a Climax steam engine, and it says Split Rock Logging. So hidden in the woods on my layout is an old narrow gauge right-of-way.
Right. I saw that.
With dirt and an old water tower burned out and code 40 rail. I'm like, I'm like, well, I got a photo of it, so I know it existed, but
Yeah.
It's another good way to sell it in there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we really have had some great, wide-ranging conversation here. This has been a lot of fun. I've been taking notes, so I appreciate that, guys.
Yeah, the Sanborn maps are good too if you get a hold of those. There's a couple websites you can maybe find what you're looking for. I've been lucky a few times Googling Sanborn maps and trying to get a certain area, but those have a lot of detail on them.
I need to sit down with you or somebody at the computer to find the correct links to Sanborn maps because I've had no luck at the limited time I've looked. But I love Sanborn maps, the ones I've seen. And at the Modelers Retreat, doesn't Dave Voss bring some maps?
He does. He brings all the maps that the local utilities made for the Twin Cities area. That's always a lot of fun. But there again, that's the kind of thing where bring a laptop because there's both at the Modelers Meet and at the convention, there's going to be Wi-Fi. So those are the kind of things we can sit down with a cold Pepsi or something and compare notes on. So.
All right, guys. I think we had an hour and a half. Great talk. Thank you, Ken and Ken.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone in chat.
And I didn't see the link for Andy Brown, so if somebody would put that in the Facebook page, I would appreciate it because I'd love to see some old Rock Island stuff.
Oh, the YouTube link. Yeah, we'll have to put that up there. And if you haven't, hit that like button, thumbs up. That's
Yep.
like button, and subscribe. We'd like to gain some subscribers. And if you have a topic you want to see us discuss or you want to come on and discuss about modeling, hit us up on our Facebook page.
Yep.
We're more than welcome to have you on here or on our podcast.
Yep.
We'd like to record some new podcasts, like to get up to episode 50. And everybody here watching is the reason we do this.
Yes.
And we hope you all stay warm this weekend. If you're in Minnesota, have fun out in Springfield if you're out there. And say hi to Gordy and all the NMRA crew.
Great.
And like Ken Zusk and I said, and Ken Browski, join up.
Yep.
$20.
Yep.
So good night, guys. We'll say
Good night.
Yeah.
Yep.
all right.